Hello, Tales of the Night community. I greet you with great pleasure. I hope everyone is well. Today I want to share my story and see if the community is able to confirm that I'm not really crazy. I want to see if something similar has ever happened to anyone. This happened just a few days ago, precisely on March 21st, on my girlfriend's birthday. I work and study, so as you know, plans get complicated when you have to divide your time between school, work, your partner, and family. That day I had my school activities in the most normal and everyday way possible. My schedule ended at 11 o'clock, and after school, I would have to go home to get ready and catch up with my girlfriend and her family at a nice restaurant in Chapultepec. I don't have a car, so I travel by subway or bus depending on the case. Those who live in Mexico City, in the Eastern Zone, know that the line that connects the center and the west is Line 8, the one that goes from Constitution of 1917 to Garibaldi. Well, once I took the subway, I calculated that my journey would be approximately an hour and a half to Auditorio Station, and on the way, everything was going normally. People in the cars, people getting on and off. But soon I started to notice something strange, a heavy feeling, like when someone is looking at you, and even though you don't know who it is, you can even perceive it. I raised my eyes to clear my doubt, and know if it was something with me, or just my suggestion. About 6 or 7 meters away, almost at the end of that car, I noticed the figure of a man about 60 years old approximately. He was thin, apparently tall, with hair full of gray, heavy gaze and long and thin fingers. Very, very, very long. He seemed like one of those people from before. You know, he wore a brown suit, tie, and shoes. These are details that one captures at first glance with just a few seconds of observation. He looked at me without even blinking with almost black eyes. Maybe it was something my mind drew on his face because I wear glasses, but I thought I saw a small, almost imperceptible smile drawn on him. It seemed strange to me, but honestly I didn't pay much attention to it. I returned to my thoughts about my girlfriend's birthday, and after a few seconds I felt that same heaviness again. Now, knowing where that subject was, I looked at him again. His eyes now looked totally black. It's not that he didn't have eyes, rather they looked like those of people who tattoo their eyes. I say this with all respect, this paralyzed me. But the strangest thing was that the people around him didn't seem to notice his presence. I arrived at the station to change lines, and somewhat disturbed I continued on my way. That journey is approximately 10 minutes walking. You know which transfer I'm talking about. I arrived at my destination and everything seemed to return to normal. Seeing my girlfriend spend time together made me forget about it completely. Until the afternoon came. We were walking on Reforma at the height of the museum zone. It wasn't so late and there were still people around. But suddenly I noticed that on the other side of the avenue, a figure suddenly appeared. And yes, it was the same person I had seen on the subway hours before. My girlfriend noticed my reaction and asked me what was wrong. I didn't know what to answer her, because I didn't want to sound like a complete crazy person, and besides it was her day. I didn't want to ruin it. With a situation like this, I just tried to downplay it, but I felt like a chill was gradually filling my back. Little by little, I turned my gaze toward where I had seen the man, but he was no longer there. That night, I was restless about all of that, and honestly, since that day, I feel like that man is following me, that he's close to me. By Monday, when I got home, my mother, who is an extremely spiritual woman, told me something disturbing. She told me that over the weekend, some sisters from her church visited her, and one of them mentioned that she felt a strange, heavy atmosphere in the house. They prayed, and through a kind of vision they were shown that in my room, there was a being that came to watch me every night. When she told me this, everything made sense. Or at least that's what I wanted to believe. Probably what I experienced that weekend had been happening for a long time. Nothing has happened in these few days. They say they haven't felt anything bad or strange, but I have the feeling that it can return at any moment, Thank you for being here once again in another edition of Tales of the Night. If you have ever experienced something strange, not only on the subway, which we already know is like a magnet for inexplicable phenomena, but on the way home, on a highway, at night, on an empty street, please share it with this community. Share your experience. Here you are in confidence. You are in family. And no one is going to judge that story, no matter how strange and incredible it may be. Here you can always deposit your paranormal experiences. So now we will move on to the next stories on this night. And of course, we have to warn you that listening to this type of stories can attract energies around you, especially if you listen at high volume, enough for you to be able to see if you're lucky. The next protagonist of Tales of the Night. My story is short, but I would like to know if something similar has happened to anyone else. To this day, what I saw has no rational explanation for me. You see, this happened 4 years ago. At that time, I had a partner who constantly did favors for her mom. That is, my mother-in-law. She was very given to attending meetings at her sister's, cousins' or friends' houses, and would ask my then partner to go pick her up in her truck. This topic was always a source of discussions between us, and it seemed like my boyfriend was her personal driver. Many times she interrupted our plans when she wanted or needed to be taken somewhere, but literally our date could end just as it began because he had to go take or bring his mom. But anyway, that's not the point here. The strange thing happened on one of those nights. My mother-in-law had gone to a meeting quite far from our house. We lived in Monterey, and she was visiting her sister in Apodaca. I grew up on the outskirts of the municipality. Those who are from here will know that this city is known for its factories and companies, many of them on the peripheries. It was approximately 2 or 3 o'clock. When she called for us to go get her, we went in the truck, my boyfriend driving and me as co-pilot. The journey would be long, but being early morning there would be no traffic, so we would probably arrive much faster than we thought. As always, we took advantage of those trips to go singing and talking, having fun. At a certain point in the journey, we found that they had closed the passage. There were traffic drums and orange cones blocking the way, so my boyfriend took an unknown street hoping to find the route to our destination again. We drove for a good while through streets and a neighborhood that seemed abandoned. When we finally found an exit, we came to what looked like a highway, but neither of us could recognize it. We didn't know if we were going back to Monterey or if we were still going in the direction toward Apodaca. We tried to use one of the navigation apps, but the signal was terrible and they wouldn't load. We had no choice but to keep moving forward, hoping to find some sign or some familiar sign. The most terrifying thing was that highway was in the middle of nowhere. There were no lights. Only the truck's headlights illuminated us. We lowered the volume of the music because the atmosphere felt dense. We were tense, not knowing where we were heading. I glanced at my boyfriend. I saw him very attentive to the road. I didn't want to say anything so as not to distract him, but I was scared. Of course I was. I kept my gaze fixed on the windshield, hoping to see something that would give us tranquility. Suddenly, in the distance, with the faint light of the headlights, we saw something. At first, we didn't know what it was. We only distinguished 2 human figures of average height. But there was something very strange about them. If I had to describe it, I would say they looked like melted people. Yes, I know it sounds strange, but I swear that's what it looked like. As if they were made of plasticine, or plastic exposed to heat. Their faces were deformed. Their clothes seemed burned. As we got closer, I fixed my gaze more on them. When we passed right next to them, I saw them up close, but only for an instant. and we were going about 60 or 80 kilometers per hour. Even so, it was enough to confirm that it wasn't my imagination. They were humans, melted, burned maybe, but in a way that it seemed like they had melted, that their skin had melted. I felt my heart jump out of my chest and I was left speechless. At that moment, I turned to look at my boyfriend and he was already looking at me. The first thing he said with a very serious tone was, "You saw that too, right?" Thus, letting out a muffled scream, I responded that yes, it couldn't be my imagination. He had seen exactly the same thing. After a few minutes of absolute silence, we managed to find a street that led us back to our path and there was more lighting there. We picked up my mother-in-law, who distracted us a bit telling us about her meeting. We didn't dare tell her anything about what we had seen. She was very religious, and we didn't want to scare her. To this day, I still remember that moment so vividly, and I still wonder what the hell was that. My boyfriend and I discussed it later when we were alone. We theorized many things, but ended up discarding them one by one. We thought maybe people with some skin problem, but why do they have burned clothes? Maybe they suffered an accident and their faces were disfigured. But then why weren't they asking for help? They were simply there, standing, in the middle of nowhere, as if waiting for us to pass by to cross without any expression. I hope someone out there in the Tales of the Night community has seen something similar in that area or another, and we can deduce together what it was we saw. Likewise, I send greetings to everyone. Hello, dear community. I write to you from Zacatecas to tell you something that happened to 3 friends and me in a municipality full of stories, legends, and mysticism. I prefer to omit the names, since none of us stands out in particular, because we all said the same thing that strange night, unlike other horror stories. I think this one has something different. We never felt fear, but rather a deep feeling of sadness and nostalgia. Some years ago we visited Peta Grande, a Zacatecan municipality known for its multiple stories, apparitions, and ghosts. Its cemetery is especially famous, and although it's always closed at night, there are those who assure that if a curious person approaches, the door mysteriously seems to open wide. We went to that place to record an episode of a horror program we were making. Peta Grande is only 5 minutes from the Zacatecan capital, so we arrived without problem. But before the recording, something surprised us. On one side of the road, an old man was signaling us asking for help. Without thinking much about it, all 4 of us decided to stop. We didn't know exactly what was happening until we got closer and saw the situation. His horse was stuck in a ravine, unable to climb due to the loose earth. Next to the old man, sitting on a stone, was a girl about 6 years old, visibly scared. I've always liked horses and charreria, so my companions encouraged me to help him. Without thinking twice, I took the animal's reins, and after almost 10 minutes of effort, we managed to get him out. The horse didn't move. He moved his head as if he were thanking us in his way. The old man and the girl also thanked us and walked away toward the center of town. We, without giving the matter more thought, prepared to record that night. What we recorded in the cemetery was surprising, but that's a story I'll tell on another occasion. What I want to share now is what happened the next day, when we returned to town to collect testimonies from the inhabitants. When we arrived in the morning, we found few people on the streets, and how to say it? A strange atmosphere. There was a palpable nervousness in the air. We walked for a while looking for locals willing to talk to us, but we couldn't find anyone. Everyone was inside the church. Finally, a woman of no more than 50 years approached us and explained the reason for that tense atmosphere. Here we are, very united. Whenever there's an accident, we try to help, and together we all cooperate for the expenses of those affected. What happened last night, besides being sad, was very shocking. We remained silent, not knowing what to say, and then the woman told us what had happened the night before. One of the oldest men in town was coming back from collecting firewood for his house. He always walked with his little granddaughter who adored him. But when they were about to arrive, the horse got scared and made them fall into a ravine. Although many of us ran to help because the accident occurred here, near the church. We could do little. They died crushed by the horse from the blows. They stayed there until very late at night when the forensic police arrived to pick them up. My friends and I were frozen. We tried to explain to her that the night before we had helped them, that maybe later they had had another accident. But the woman shook her head. She said no. We went to the place where everything had happened. The horse from the community was still there, in the same place where we had gotten it out. They had only moved it a little to recover the old man's body.
Look, the girl was next to that stone, the lady told us, pointing to the place. That's where she hit herself. That's why you can't see the blood. It was yesterday around 11 o'clock at night. My friends and I looked at each other, scared, in shock. We arrived at Peta Grande exactly at that time, and that stone was the same one where we saw the girl sitting. There was a long silence. Then the woman told us something I'll never forget. They didn't know anything. Because of their ages, they didn't deserve to suffer or walk here as souls in torment. They were looking to reach heaven quickly, and you helped them get out. When they reached their destination, they did well. We said no more. Without finishing the recording, we decided to go to church instead. I don't know if to pray, thank, or simply try to assimilate what had happened. And when we left, when we returned to the highway toward the capital, I saw it with my own eyes. The old man, the girl, and the horse walking together in the night. This time they didn't look scared. It seemed like they were simply on their way. What I felt when I saw them, the atmosphere was of peace, of tranquility, of a deep calm. And at that moment I understood that they no longer belonged to this world. I understood that somehow we had helped them cross over. This happened more than 15 years ago, and for a long time I kept the story well guarded. But I feel that talking about it does me good because it makes me reflect. I think that maybe the only thing the apparitions are looking for is a way out to their eternal rest. The videos we recorded were published, and for a time they were broadcast on the program. But with time the project ended. Everything was stored on an old computer that finally broke down, and we were left with an experience that, although paranormal, was more incredible and sadder than terrifying. At some other time, I'm going to share with you what we were able to record that same night in the cemetery, and what we recorded after seeing the girl, the old man, and his horse in Peta Grande, Zacatecas. I ask you, not without first congratulating you on your work for this community. I promise to return with more stories we have lived in this state. Thank you for your attention and for the space. Greetings to the entire community. Very good evening, community. I would like to share my story with you, and I hope not to come across as crazy. I study anthropology. My name is Francisco, and I'm 25 years old. This happened more or less 6 years ago in the Zócalo of Mexico City. I have always idolized nighttime walks through the city. The hustle and bustle of people is less, and you breathe a peace interrupted only by cars and passers-by who are leaving work or who simply go out for social reasons. Even so, I had never seen the Zócalo completely empty, which if it's true, there's generally some homeless person or gendarmes in the area. But the night this happened, it was completely alone. I was just leaving work and had to cross toward Madero Street. For those who don't know it, it's the continuation of Juarez Avenue that flows right in front of the Palace of Fine Arts. Any person who has visited this city should recognize it. I stopped at the flagpole on the plaza to tie my shoelaces when I heard bells like the ones dancers use. So one of these people who danced near the cathedral was heading toward that street, or a nearby one. but when I raised my eyes, I saw no one. Even though the bells kept ringing, soon a kind of death whistle also began to be heard. I got scared. I began to turn in all directions without managing to locate where the sounds were coming from, until among the shadows of the street that leads to the Templo Mayor, I glimpsed a tall figure, dressed in something out of an Aztec legend that I barely remembered. Have you heard of Mictlantecutli, the Broken Face, one of the regents in the clan? A miner who was also known as the Lord of Rest. At that moment, I didn't know his physical appearance. I only knew that what I was seeing wasn't normal. The light from the cathedral lamps fell on a greenish skeleton with a headdress that seemed very old, like unearthed. The green feathers were very damaged. For me, as an anthropologist, it was a bittersweet vision. On one hand, I appreciated its clearly Mexica appearance, and on the other, it horrified me because at that moment I thought that maybe it was another legend that depicted the one with the obsidian heart. But I immediately discarded that possibility because that entity has no head. And what I saw, clearly had one. Well, it was a fleshless head without eyes, but I still felt like it was staring at me, despite not having the organs to do so. Of course I ran. I ran to Madero and didn't see people until I reached the height of Motolinia, another street that connects with the Pino Suarez Metro. There were some Metro police officers there. I approached very scared. I told them what I had seen, and of course they laughed at me. They told me that if I wasn't controlling it, not to smoke it. And I got angry because I was really on the verge of tears and fear. I turned toward the Zócalo, and the apparition was no longer there. Almost a year later, I found stories about legends and monsters of ancient Anáhuac on the internet. There I learned the story of that entity, and a horrible panic entered me. Since then, I don't walk through the Zócalo at night, although I know it's beautiful. But on that occasion, I proved that those who once terrorized the original peoples of the Mexica Empire still walk these lands that were theirs more than 500 years ago. Hello. I'm a big fan of tales of the night. Since I was little, I've liked horror stories, and every time I heard them, I wondered what it would be like to live something like that. Until one day it happened to me. Now I'm 22 years old, and I haven't experienced anything similar again. I'm from Peru, and this happened when I was 14 years old. I don't remember the exact date, but that day I was left alone at home because my parents were in another city. My dad called me to let me know that he would arrive alone and leave again in the afternoon to arrive at night, rest, and the next day go to work. But when 7 o'clock at night came, my dad still hadn't arrived. I got tired of waiting for him. I went to have dinner, but something was bothering me. I felt like I wasn't alone. The house was strangely freezing, and my dog, who always accompanied me, was very restless. He sat at the door and began to growl. I finished dinner and went up to my room. By that time it was around 9 o'clock at night and my father still hadn't arrived. I tried to call him several times, but the call never went through. 30 minutes later, I heard someone opening the living room door and talking on the phone. It was my dad. I thought he had already arrived, so I said to myself that first he would have dinner, and then he would come to my room to say goodnight. However, the conversation continued, which began to seem strange to me. I got out of bed and looked through the stairs just as I heard the dining room door open. My dog got more nervous and growled nonstop, but the voice on the phone kept talking. I don't know why I got scared. I decided to go back to my room. 5 minutes later, I heard a crash, a plate falling to the floor. I quickly left my room and looked through the stairs again. The dining room and living room lights were off. I went up to my parents' room, but it was empty. The whole house was in complete silence. I ran back to my room and brought my dog in and locked the door. I felt like someone had entered the house and would hurt us. I got into bed and suddenly the light in my room went out. My dog began to bark, but then it was as if someone had told him to be quiet because he immediately went under the bed. At that moment, from my sister's room, I heard footsteps and a mocking voice, something unintelligible. I felt a fear that is very difficult for me to describe. Among the murmurs, I distinguished something. The voice was calling me and asking me to open the door. Now, at first it sounded like my dad, but at the same time it had a feminine tone. Suddenly, the voice came from my sister's room and began to struggle with my bedroom door. With each blow, the voice repeated louder for me to open it, until suddenly it started laughing. Open for me? Open for me. Little by little, the blow ceased and the voice went away. I stayed awake for almost 30 minutes until, completely exhausted, I fell asleep. In the morning, I saw that I had many calls and messages from my dad, who told me he was just on his way home. I went down to the dining room expecting to find the broken plate, but everything was intact, as if nothing had happened. I know my story is going to sound incredible to many people and to others. Maybe not as terrifying as the ones they tell here. But imagine, for a child like me, it was a terrible experience. It's the only time something like this has happened to me. Thank you for listening to me. Greetings from Peru. I've been in the Tales of the Night community for a while, and today I want to share my story. I prefer that my name remain anonymous, since this happened at my previous job at a very well-known company. I'm from Mexicali, Baja California, and I started working at this company in September 2023. At first, everything was going normally, but over time I started to notice strange things. I saw shadows, heard footsteps and voices, especially when I had to close the store, but nothing as strong as what I'm about to tell you. One night, precisely during a closing, only the manager, the guard, and I remained. While we were finishing up with pending tasks, I decided to go to the bathroom. The journey would be long home. When I was going in, I managed to see a shadow pass toward the men's bathroom and I heard heavy footsteps like boots. Someone tired from so much walking. I stopped thinking that maybe it was the guard doing a routine check to make sure no customers were left. Since the men's and women's bathrooms were facing each other, I decided to wait for him to come out so nothing would be misinterpreted. However, the footsteps kept sounding in there, but the guard didn't come out. It sounded like he was walking around the bathroom. It was then that I heard a groan of tiredness. Assuming the guard was still inside, I decided to leave so I wouldn't be late. When I returned to the manager, he asked me if I was ready to go. I responded yes, but that we couldn't leave, that the guard was still in the bathroom. Which guard? He asked me. The guard who was with us is still in the bathroom, I responded. The manager looked at me very seriously. Really? Only you and I are left in the store. The guard left a while ago. I didn't know what to tell him. I had heard him clearly. For a time, I thought that had been the worst experience I could have there, but I had no idea that things would get even stranger. Without telling anyone about what had happened to me, I began to notice that other colleagues were also complaining about strange noises, especially in some areas of the company. Footsteps, whispers, objects moving, sounds. But there was never anyone else there. We wanted to think it was our imagination, until a customer filed a complaint. Between tears and completely terrified, she told us that a child had appeared to her in the bathroom. According to her account, it was a small child, about 4 years old. And after that experience, of course, the woman swore she would never return to the store. Imagine something so weird, receiving a complaint because a ghost appears to a customer. As employees, we decided to do something about it. Someone proposed lighting a candle in the bathroom with the intention of helping whoever was trapped in that place.
But something strange happened. The candle always went out by itself over and over again, without any logical reason. Sometimes it would go out right in front of us. Finally, we chose to remove it, and surprisingly, it was then that everything seemed to calm down. Until it was my turn again. This happened just 2 weeks ago. It was around 6:30 in the afternoon, so the store was open and had customers. I went to the bathroom, and when I entered, I heard someone else enter behind me dragging their feet. I thought it was another customer and didn't give it importance until I looked under the cubicles and realized something terrifying. There were no feet in the bathroom. I breathed deeply and closed my eyes, trying to calm down. I knew something was very wrong. I didn't hear that person leave. I only heard when they entered the bathroom, and then total silence. That only meant one thing. Whatever had entered was still in there with me. I tried to stay calm and headed to the mirror. As I passed by the cubicles, my gaze drifted toward the gap that separated the bathrooms and I could see her. Someone in white. Someone with extremely pale skin and eyes with many dark circles. So many like sunken. She was staring at me fixedly. For a moment I wanted to believe that my mind was playing a bad joke on me, but there was something even worse in the mirror's reflection. I observed how the door of that bathroom opened by itself. I swear to you, community, that my heart stopped. I looked toward the cubicle, and there was no one. The bathroom was completely empty, but how could I then explain what I had seen? How could I explain what I had heard? I ran out and went to my area, and as soon as I arrived, I started crying from the huge scare I had gotten. After that night, I had it clear, and I quit a week later. Whatever is in that place, there's something that makes me feel it wasn't good. I'll always be left with the doubt of who it was and why it was there, but as always, you'll have the best theories. Thank you very much for reading me, and I hope to be able to appear sometime on Tales of the Night. I never thought I'd be the next protagonist, and I think that just as it happened to me, it can happen to anyone who is listening to this story. Have a very good night.